In this video, we're going to mask our rust layer so that we can reveal parts of our painted metal underneath. Alright, so here we have our base, which created our rust material, and we placed this here into a group. I'm going to actually mask this layer group. So here with the group selected, I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a black mask. So now we can start building up our mask. So here I'm going to start by creating a fill. So here I'll click the grayscale button. We have our mini shelf. I'm already filtering for grunge. So I'm just going to scroll through these grunge maps and I'm looking for one grunge 004. So here, let me see if I see that guy in here. Actually here, let's just type it in. So I'll say 00 and here it's starting to show up. So this is the one I want. Grunge map 004. I think it's being cut off there in the screen capture. But we're going to choose this guy. Alright, so the next thing, I'm going to start to just tile this. So I'm going to set a UV scale with this. Now, in this case, I'm actually not going to switch this to triplanar because when I do, it kind of gives me a little bit of this projection smearing here, which I don't really want. So I'm just going to set this here to be a UV projection. And since this is going to just be like the base buildup of this massive mask effect that I'm building here, we won't see any seams. Alright, so here I have this in place. The next thing I'd like to do here would be to add another fill on top of this guy. So I'm going to just create another fill. Here I'll click the grayscale button to launch the mini shelf. This time here we're just going to filter based on grunge, and I'm going to use this grunge concrete old. So we'll use this guy here. Now this time I am going to switch this one here to triplanar, and I'm going to play around a little bit with this balance and contrast. So we'll increase our contrast. Let's play around here with this balance. So now this grunge concrete is overriding. So I do want to set the blending mode here to max lighten. And so now we're just starting to kind of build up this rust effect that we want here. So now that I have these guys in place, I want to start to isolate where this rust is starting to accumulate. So I'm going to, again, add another effect. This time I'm going to add a generator. Click the generator button, and I'm going to use this light generator again. So we'll select this guy. Just so I can see what I'm doing, I'm going to hold down the Alt key and left click on the mask so that I could view in mask mode. So now, here on the light, I'm going to switch my vertical angle once again to around 270 here. And if I need to, I can just click into this input field and just type in 270. Alright, so here I have this. I'm going to just play around here with the highlight glossiness, as well as the highlight level and attenuation. So I'm going to try to get something like this here. Alright, so now that I have this in place, what I want to do is just switch my blending mode from normal to multiply. So when I do that, now we start to see that we're really kind of just accumulating the rust on these angled planes here. Alright, so I'm going to hit M on the keyboard to go into material mode so I can take a look at what my mask is producing so far. Now it's just a matter of going back and just kind of playing around with some of these fill layers that I have. So here I might just drop this balance down a little bit. Here also I might try to play around with my UV scale. So I think I like something more like this. And let's go to this grunge map that we have below and let me increase my contrast. Again, play around with my balance. So let's do something like this. And yeah, I think this is going to work for me so far. Okay, so I have this in place. Now, one of the things I would like to mention here about this effect stack that I haven't mentioned before is that the stack is actually processing from the bottom up. So, of course, this grunge map 004 is first. Then above this, we have the grunge concrete, which is using the max lighten mode. And then finally, we have this light generator, which is being multiplied. Now, we can just left click and drag and drop to replace the order of these if we need to. So that's something that you can do there. And like I said, all of these effects are building together to create this effect stack, which is producing the mask we have thus far. So again, I'll hit M on the keyboard, and let's just continue to build this up. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add another generator. So here I'm clicking the Add Effect button, Add Generator. Let's come over here to our Generator tab. And this time I'm going to use MG Dirt. So what I'm going to want to do is just increase my contrast here so I can get something like this. And again, I can always play around with my dirt level. So let's try just maybe a value of around 0.75. This should work okay. So this is starting to just kind of collect a lot of this rust here in these cavity areas. And so now to combine that with all the other effects that I have so far, of course, I'm going to want to change my blending mode. This time, I'm also going to switch this here to max lighten. So now things are just starting to build up. Here's what we had before, and now we're adding this MG dirt. And so here's what we have at this stage. So now the last part of this effect stack that I'm building up here is I want to start to kind of work on this edging. So to do that, I'm going to add yet another generator. So add effect, add generator, and this time here we're going to use the MG mask editor. So here I'm going to start with my curvature. So let me increase my curvature value all the way to 1. And then I'm going to expand my curvature controls and then just start to play around with my shape values here. So I'm going to get something more like this. I'm going to increase my contrast, and here we go. So now I just have the rust just right on the edges like this. And again, I might play around with this medium value just a little bit. All right, and we can always come back and tweak this later on if we need to. Here, let's close up the curvature, and let's start to use our image inputs here for our texture and the secondary texture to kind of eat into this edge, because right now it's just really clean, perfect edge here based on our curvature map. So let's come over here to our image inputs, and for this first texture, I'm going to start to just take a look at some grunge textures, and I think what I'm going to do is just use grunge concrete old yet again. So we'll enable this. We will scroll up here to where we have our texture input. So here you can see we have texture and texture 2. By default, the value is at 0, so that means that the texture is not even being used here in the process. So I'm going to take the texture slider and set it all the way to 1. So now we can use this texture. Let's expand the texture controls, and I'm going to want to switch this blending mode. So I'm going to switch this from overlay to multiply. And now this is going to start to eat into that curvature effect. But of course, we need to really start to play around with this to get the effect that we want. So here, let's try to adjust our scale. Let's also take a look at our contrast. So here, just adjusting the contrast, we're starting to kind of break up that edge here a bit. Again, I'm just going to start to play around with some of these settings here. Let's also take this mode into triplanar. So I'm going to enable triplanar to this, so we don't have to worry about any of those seams. And then I'm going to scroll all the way down here to the actual grunge texture itself, and let's play around with its settings. So here we have this balance, and you can see this acts like a global control, so we can kind of dial this effect up and down. So I think I'm going to try something maybe, I don't know, around 0.45. So we'll do something like this here for our edge. Maybe I could try increasing the contrast, not really doing too much there for me. So again, let's go back here to our texture and just play around here with what we have. I think I'm going to actually leave the brightness alone, so let's just set that back to 0. And again, just play around with the scale here. So I might just set the scale to around, let's say 0.53. So we'll do something like this. So that's that first texture image. Now, the next thing I'm going to do, let's come over here to the texture. And we'll just close this one up. And now I would actually like to use this secondary texture as well. So again, it's just adding more variation of grunge on top of this as you work. So let's come over here to our inputs. And for the texture secondary, let's click this to open up our mini shelf. And this time I'm going to do a search for grunge. I'm going to start to type in scratch, and it's going to filter a couple scratch maps for me. And I'm going to use this one here called Grunge Scratches Rough. So I'll left click to enable this guy. Now, we don't see anything by default, again, because if we scroll up here to the Texture 2 properties, we can see the slider is set to 0, which is basically just turning it off. So let's take this slider and set this all the way to 1. So here you can see something's already happening. It's kind of cutting into it, which is pretty good. I like what it's doing there. However, I might want to change that blending mode, so it's set to overlay. Let's set this to max lighten and see what we have. Okay, so now we're getting just some of these large scratches everywhere. So I'm just going to adjust the scale of this noise. So we'll do something like this. We can play around with our contrast here. Let's also just scroll down once again here to where we have the properties for this scratch grunge and play around with the balance of this. So maybe something like this. Scratch tiling. So I might do that, just increase that a little bit. So we can do, we can adjust the scratch width. And again, it's just a matter of just playing around just to kind of find the settings that we want here with this. All right, so now I'm going to come back here to the mask editor, this top level effect, and I'm going to switch its blending mode here to max lighten, which is going to just combine everything together. And now here in the end, this is our final rust mask that we've created. So I'll Alt left click on the mask, and this shows the mask that we have here. So again, I'll hit M on the keyboard. And so now we can view everything in full material mode. Now, we've been generating or trying to create this mask here using this effect stack. And you can see that, well, it can get pretty complex. We have a lot of effects here combining together to create this overall mask. So just as in the previous video, we created a smart material, we're also able to create a smart mask. So let's say that, you know, I've gone through the trouble of creating this very specific mask effect, and I like this. I want to be able to use this time and time again. So what I can do is just right click on this mask, and I can choose to create a smart mask. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to create a smart mask. Let's come over here to our dock and open our shelf. And you can see here we have a category for smart masks, and our new mask here has been created for us. So here I'm just going to tear my shelf off here for just a moment so we can kind of see this. And let's just take this preview mode here down to medium. All right, so let's say that, you know, here on another project, so we've done all this work. Let me come in here and just remove this mask. So we'll come in here and just say, well, I'll do clear mask. So now I have this black mask. And let's say, you know, I have another project and I want to do something similar here with this rust. Well, I've already have this smart material mask. So now what I can do is just left click and just drag and drop my mask right onto here, and it simply applies all of the effects. And as you can see, everything is fully editable. So here, once again, I'm going to come in here and just clear my mask. And let's say I could use a different one of these. Like here's one called Rust Ground. Let's use this guy. So I'll left click, drag and drop that here, and then it produces this mask effect for me. So now you can see that we can quickly save these masks and reuse them. So when we start new projects, the more effects and materials that you create, just the easier it becomes to texture assets in future projects. So once more here, I'm just going to clear this mask. Let's grab the mask that I created, drag and drop and place it into here. I can actually right click on this menu and I could rename this here. So I might just call this Rust. So I might just call this Rust Edges, and I'll just hit enter just to save that. Now I have this mask that I can use in future projects. So here we'll just close out our shelf. And now we have our rust material completed. All right, so now to finish off this rust material, I'm going to go back here to the base layer. And here we have our color. And I'm going to do a little color correction onto this texture that I imported. So here under my effects, I'm going to add a filter. And I'm going to click this filter button here, and I'm going to use this HSL filter. I'm going to leave it at perceptive, and then I'm just going to increase this hue value just a little bit. I'm going to decrease my saturation and then decrease my lightness here. So I'm going to get something a little bit more like this. So now if we look at this HSL filter that I have, if I turn it off, this is what I had before, which I felt was just a little too much red, a little oversaturated, and then here I'm using this HSL perceptive mode here for this filter to just color correct that and get that into more of the color tonality that I want. And so that is going to finish up here this rust material. So now we have our rust and we have a painted material. Oh, you know, one thing I forgot to do is since I finished up this rust material, I want to create a smart material out of it. So let's select our group that we have. You always have to have a group in order to create a smart material. So we have that already. Let's right click and let's choose to create a smart material. So we've done that. Let's just check it here in the shelf. I'll load my shelf and here we have our rust material. And here's what this guy looks like. So now in the next video, we're going to take a look at how we can use these smart materials to quickly texture all of the other texture sets we have here for our lantern.